Do low-carb diets increase coronary calcium? A brand new study says so, but does it really? Find out the details here today on Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website, and as always, you can engage live in the content. You need to go follow me right here. I am on @JimmyRants over on Instagram. So go check me out there. We go live Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So thank you so much for being here today. We also simulcast live over on my Facebook page as well as on my YouTube channel. And guys, I got a special surprise for you. We have another audience here with us today. Besides Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, I have a fourth device. So now I am over here on my Periscope. You guys remember Periscope? Yes, they're still around. I peeked in today. I still have 10,000 followers there. So welcome to the Periscope family here on Jimmy Rants. If you missed the live, you can watch it on the replay over here on Instagram. We put it on the IGTV. Just as soon as this is over, it goes right up on IGTV. We also put the past episodes up over on YouTube. Type in a keyword, Jimmy Rants, you will find the show. And then finally, pop on over to the official website for this show. It is JimmyRants.com. And while you're there, you can see all the past episodes, 600 something and counting in terms of the number of episodes here. So we are rocking and rolling. So today I have a bad science I want to talk to you about. I like talking about research papers that show good science and show good methodology and all the things when you look at a research paper. Sometimes though, and unfortunately more times than not, these research papers are not that great. And they have flaws in their research. And the study I'm going to read from today is a majorly flawed piece of research. And so we're going to get into that here in just a minute. But it's all about coronary calcium. So you guys know, if you've read my book, Cholesterol Clarity, if you've read this book here, then you know all about the coronary calcium score, the CT heart scan to determine your level of calcified plaque. And so if you talk to people out there, they have been led to believe that it's fat that leads to deposits in the coronary arteries that then gives you a heart attack. That's what they believe. And so it's not true, obviously. Having deposits of calcium in there are a direct result of inflammation. And if you didn't have inflammation in the coronary arteries, then the plaque would not start to build up. The only reason the plaque is there is because you have inflammation in your coronary arteries, primarily from eating carbohydrate, refined carbohydrate, and from consuming vegetable oils. Both of those things are highly inflammatory. I would also add in a stressful life is also highly inflammatory. Environmental toxins are also inflammatory. All of these things can lead to your body being in an inflamed existence. And so when the body's inflamed, that inflammation is all through the body, but especially in your coronary arteries. So when your coronary arteries are on fire, something in the body goes and puts out the fire, like a firefighter. And that something is cholesterol. So cholesterol goes to the scene of the fire, which is in your coronary arteries, and it kind of sits on top of the inflammation, trying to calm it down. Well, in the process of that, there are little calcium deposits that get laid down, one on top of the other, So this is what gives you your coronary calcium score when you go get a CT heart scan. So I've turned to the part of Cholesterol Clarity because I want to explain this before we get into this study about the coronary artery calcium progression, because it's so important to know what this CT heart calcium scan of your heart does. So here's a question I had. You might have too. Does high cholesterol actually damage the heart? The complicated answer is that elevated cholesterol in and of itself is not a disease. The problem comes from oxidized LDL particles penetrating the arterial wall and turning into calcified plaque. So that's how you get that calcium in your coronary arteries. This is why I encourage anyone worried about high cholesterol levels to get a CT heart calcium scan of their chest, which will show if there's any calcium buildup happening in the arteries. And so it's something that's pretty routine. It's basically just a CAT scan of your chest. and it looks for actual signs of calcified plaque in your arteries. So this CT heart scan calcium score test is pretty inexpensive here in South Carolina. It was about $100. I've had a couple of them over the past decade, and pretty easy to do in about 3 minutes. And then a few days later, you get your score, which mine's a big fat 0, by the way. That is the goal. It must be ordered by a doctor, so you can't do it on your own. You have to get a doctor to prescribe a CT heart scan to get this coronary artery calcium score. And make sure it's the right one. Don't get the one where they shoot dye through your body. You want the one that does not do that. So yeah, 0 is what you're looking for on the coronary calcium score. So I say all that to say that we have a study now that just got published, and it's in the journal Arteriosclerosis, Thrombosis, and Vascular Biology. And it is from researchers out of, where are they from? I think they're in China. Yeah, China. And they looked at a low carbohydrate diet, and they claimed that a low carb diet is correlated directly with an increased progression of coronary artery calcium. Now imagine my surprise when I see a study like this, having written a book all about cholesterol, all about kind of heart disease and how it progresses and all the everything. And I hear that. Now, I never take things at face value. You guys know me well enough. I break down studies all the time here on Jimmy Rants. And when I saw this headline, I'm like, oh, there's got to be more to the story. And of course there is. There always is more to the story. So don't ever hear about something and take it at face value, because more times than not, there's more to the story than meets the eye. So let's get into the more than meets the eye so that you can better understand this as well. The title of the research paper, Low Carbohydrate Diet Score and Coronary Artery Calcium Progression, the results from the CARDIA study, C-A-R-D-I-A, okay? So the objective was to investigate whether low carbohydrate diets were associated with coronary artery calcium progression. So basically, most people under the age of 50 tend to have 0 in their heart calcium score. And then as they age and as they do things in their diet and lifestyle, it can make that progression of the coronary calcium that much worse. So what they did was they included the participants who completed computed tomography assessment of baseline CAC, which is that coronary calcium, in 2000 to 2001. And then they did a follow-up in 5 to 10 years later, food frequency questionnaires at 0, 7, and 20 years. That's a big red flag. Food frequency questionnaire. So they basically say, well, how much red meat have you consumed in the last year? How much blah, blah, blah have you consumed in the last year? They just go down the list. Can you remember all the everything? So it's really horrible trying to get patients to recall what they ate in a food recollection survey. So the CAC progression was defined as CAC of anything less than 0 at follow-up amongst the participants who had a baseline of 0. An annualized change of 10 or percent change of greater than 10% was also considered progression. Okay, so they had 2,226 included patients, average age of 40 and a half. 45.4% of them were men. The carbohydrate intake, listen to this. This is the key. The carbohydrate intake accounted for 49% of the total energy consumed. Let that sink in. 49% of their diet was carbohydrate. In what universe would somebody consider that a low carb diet? And yet right there in their headline of their study, low carbohydrate diet and coronary calcium progression. 49%, what? 204 of them, which was 9.2%, had a coronary calcium score at the beginning over a mean follow-up of 8.3 years. 591 of them, 26.5%, had progression of CAC. Well, no kidding. Their diet was loaded with carbohydrate. Who are they trying to fool? They're also pretending like carbohydrate of 40, it's actually 47.8%. Carbohydrate of 47.8% is going to be innocuous on that. No, we know carbohydrate directly impacts that coronary calcium score. We also know that vegetable oils do as well. How can they say with a straight face that this is a low carbohydrate diet? It's not even close. After adjustment for traditional cardiovascular risk factors and dietary factors, carbohydrate intake as a percentage of total energy was inversely associated with the risk of CAC progression. In other words, the lower your carbs, the higher the CAC progression. Whoa, whoa, whoa. 47.8%. Like, think about that, guys. In a 2,000 calorie diet, you're saying that right around 1,000 of those calories is coming from carbohydrate. You know what 1,000 calories worth of carbohydrates are? 250 grams of carbohydrate. That is not low carb in any way, shape, form, or fashion. It's just not. And yet they want to pretend like, oh, well, low carb leads to a progression of coronary artery calcium. No, it doesn't. That's not what we're seeing at all. And yet that's what we're seeing in this study being claimed. And so how, pray tell, can they get away with this? Other than people like Jimmy Moore calling them out on it on his show. This gets passed as good science, guys. And they wonder why people don't trust the scientific world. Trust the science, trust the science, trust the science. Well, the science isn't very reliable, at least in this case. Listen to this. Furthermore, the animal-based, but not the plant-based score was significantly associated with a higher risk of coronary artery calcium. So they're claiming that if you have an animal-based low-carb diet, that's far worse for you than a plant-based one. Now, there's no evidence to prove that. Neither one of these are low-carb diets. I guarantee you, if you put people on a purely carnivore keto type of diet, which is about as low-carb as you get, carnivore is zero carb, and you put it against a high-carb plant-based diet, or let's just even say 50% carbohydrate plant-based diet, you're going to see a far different result. So their conclusion is low-carb diets starting at a young age are associated with an increased risk of subsequent coronary artery calcium progression, particularly when the animal protein or fat are chosen to replace the carbohydrate. What are you supposed to replace carbohydrate with if not animal foods? You're supposed to suck on coconut oil, avocados. Like, what do they expect people to do? That's just the abstract, guys. Let me get into the actual study, because the study doesn't get any better. It just makes the point all the more how bogus this study really is. All right, introduction. Cardiovascular disease is a major public health issue and the leading cause of death globally. Healthy lifestyle choices are crucial for the prevention of cardiovascular disease. Adopting a healthy lifestyle earlier in life holds the potential to have a greater impact on cardiovascular disease risk reduction, whereas unhealthy lifestyle changes are associated with an increased risk for subclinical atherosclerosis in middle age. Low carbohydrate diets, which restrict carbohydrates in favor of more protein and fat, have gained substantial popularity because low-carb diets can induce, at least in the short term, weight loss, which is considered to be beneficial for cardiovascular health. No. Low-carb diets are more than just about weight loss. They always do this in studies. They always say, well, the benefits you get from low carbohydrate diets in your health are a result of the weight loss that they induce. No, 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 no. Let's not pretend like when you reduce carbohydrates to a level that's therapeutic for you, you're not seeing benefits that go beyond the weight loss. You see a lowering of inflammation, you see a lowering of the blood sugar, blood pressure, insulin, on and on and on. You see all these direct benefits that come from carbohydrate restriction. So let's not give the credit to the weight loss that comes from the low-carb diet. The low-carb diet improves your health, which by extension of that helps you lose weight. However, due to relative high levels of protein, fat, and cholesterol in the diet, long-term low-carb diets may raise concerns over ketosis, abnormal lipid profiles, and renal effects. Guys, they have been saying these kinds of things for years. I've been around for over 15 years, and they've been saying these exact same talking points for years. And what I want to know is, if all of these things are so dastardly, why haven't we seen the bodies? Why haven't we seen bodies piling up of people that eat low-carb, keto, paleo, real food, carnivore? Why aren't we seeing bodies piling up? Gee, I don't know. It's because maybe it's not as unhealthy and all the doom and gloom that they're claiming, even in studies like this one. So all of these things they say about low-carb diets counteract the potential cardiovascular benefits of on your cardiovascular disease, and they don't. All right, so he looks at a few other studies looking at low-carb diets. Let me go down a little bit. Coronary artery calcium assessed by computed tomography, so that's the CT. Literally, you go into a CT scan, they get the little image of your chest, and you breathe in and hold it. And then they move, and then they get a little another, and then hold in, breathe, and hold it. And that's how they do it. And it's about a 3-minute thing. It's totally painless. If you've never had a CT heart scan, they're really cool, actually. Get your doctor to prescribe one. It's about $100, maybe a little bit more in other places, but here where I live, it's about $100. And it's really cool as a predictor of heart disease. And so they established this CT coronary artery calcium score to try to be a strong predictor of cardiovascular morbidity and mortality, and to see if you have high cholesterol. This is something we noted in my book, Cholesterol Clarity. If you have high cholesterol and you're worried because your doctor wants to put you on a statin medication or some other therapy, just ask for a CT heart scan to confirm that you actually have signs of heart disease. Because if you don't have any coronary calcium in your arteries, you don't have heart disease. Why are you taking a medication? Why are you doing anything other than shifting your diet and lifestyle? If you got a zero, whatever you're doing to produce that zero, keep doing that thing to keep it at zero. It is shown that nutrition and diet are of importance in the progression of vascular calcification, and they are. Notably, the associations between dietary carbohydrates, coronary artery calcium, and other atherosclerotic markers have been an area of scientific interest as of late. The CARDIA study, which stands for Coronary Artery Risk Development in Young Adults, it's a prospective multi-center cohort study that's sponsored by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institutes. It includes black and white participants. It's designed to identify the influences of potential risk factors beginning in young adulthood on cardiovascular disease as they go later in life. Findings from the CARDIA study have contributed substantially to the knowledge about the importance of lifestyle and environmental factors during young adulthood to the development of coronary artery calcium throughout their midlife. So in this study, we aim to provide new evidence about the contribution of low-carb diets starting early in adulthood to future cardiovascular risk. By using the longitudinal CARDIA study data, we examine the association. This is the key. This is simply an associational study. And association does not mean causation. Association does not mean proves. Association does not mean we need to all go out and quit our low-carb diet if they make some bad conclusion. To keep that in mind as well, the science is very, very weak as it applies to people. Not all studies are created equal, and you need to know that. If you watch Jimmy Rants regularly, you hear me talk about good studies and bad studies all the time. This is a very bad study. Even if it produced results that were very favorable towards low-carb diets, I would still call it a very bad study for determining anything. All right, so let's take a look at what they did. The subjects of the details of the cardio study design and examinations have been reported previously. Briefly, it's a prospective cohort study designed to investigate the evolution of cardiovascular disease risk. They have participants recruited from 4 field centers: Birmingham, Alabama, Chicago, Illinois, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Oakland, California. In 1985 to 86, which was year 0 of this study, a total of 5,115 black and white men and women between the ages of 18 and 30 were enrolled in the study. Until now, 8 follow-up examinations have been conducted in year 2, 5, 7, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. As coronary artery calcium was first measured by CT scans at year 15 in the years 2000 and 2001 in the cardio study. So that didn't even come around until the turn of the century. So they didn't get the first CT scans until 15 years after the study started. For the purpose at the present study, we included all participants at year 15, which by then they had 3,671. Participants were excluded if one of the following data could not be available: baseline CAC data, follow-up, and some other issues that they negated. So the final study sample size that they analyzed was 2,226 adults. All participants provided informed consent, meaning go ahead and do and use this to your pleasure. And the study was approved by the institutional review boards at each of the field centers. All right, so how did they assess the diet? This right here is so key. How did they assess what these people ate? Because it matters. Dietary data was assessed by using a trained interviewer-administered cardio diet history. Listen to this. They did this at year 0, so at baseline, 7 years, 20 years, as described previously. Briefly, interviewers asked the participants open-ended questions about dietary consumption of 100 food categories, that reference 1,609 separate food items within the past month. So they tell them, okay, broccoli. How much broccoli did you eat in the past month? Broccoli. We go on once, go on twice. How many pounds of broccoli did you eat? Okay, 1. Okay. Okay. Steak. How much steak, red meat steak did you eat in the past? What? You ate 50 pounds of steak in the last, what? Okay, 50 pounds. Okay. Grains. How many grains? How much grains did you eat in the last month? 0. What do you mean 0? Don't you know you're supposed to eat grains? Grains, bread, pasta. Okay, 0. And that's how they did it. Is that reliable science? Is that even close to good science? No, not even on a good day. Foods consumed were assigned to 1 to 166 food groups, devised by the Minnesota Nutrition Coordinating Center. Food group intake was assessed as servings per day of constituent foods based on their gram weight information. In the present study, we calculated the average of 0 and 7 dietary data in analysis to reduce potential confounding from a single assessment only and to avoid the possibility that macronutrient consumption measured at year 20 may have been influenced by the measure of your CAC at year 15. So what they're saying there is they had to fill in the blanks of the missing years. And it's kind of like those movies where they have extras and they need a big crowd. but they have like 100 extras and then they just CGI them everywhere. That's basically what they did. They got a very small little sample, like the last month of what they ate, and then they extrapolated that that's how they ate over the years. Is that good science? Not even close. Do you see how they can really make this look like anything they want it to look like? It's the worst possible kind of science because it's just not honest, and it doesn't really serve a good purpose other than to get the headline, which is what it got because it got my attention. The macronutrients, which are carbohydrates, fat, and protein, were expressed as the percentage of total energy calculated as daily calories derived from each macronutrient divided by the total number of calories for the day. It is supposed that the effects of long-term carbohydrate restriction can be varied since different types of proteins and fats from animals and plants are chosen to replace carbohydrates to provide enough energy. Therefore, we calculated animal and plant-based low-carb diets as a score, respectively, as reported previously. The points of each of the 3 macronutrients were summed to create an overall low-carb diet score. Plant-based low-carb diet score was calculated by the summation of the points for carbs, plant protein, and plant fat as a percentage of total energy. The same thing they did with the animal-based foods low-carb diet score, calculated by the carbohydrates, animal protein, and animal fat as a percentage of total energy intake. So, as a result, the highest score represented low carbohydrate and high animal or plant protein or fat intake. I know that's just kind of giving you how they split it out. All right, so the measurements for the coronary artery calcium were measured at 15, 20, and 25 years using a standardized protocol. At years 15 and 20, the Cardia study conducted either a cardiac-gated electron beam CT scan or a multi-detector CT, depending on the study site. Basically, they measure the same thing, just 2 similar ways of doing it. At year 25, given the high reproducibility at previous examinations, a single CT scan was performed using a multi-detector CT scanner. The comparability of electron beam CT and multi-detector CT have previously been demonstrated. Scans were read centrally by a trained reader who was blinded to who the participants were. Coronary artery calcium was scored using the Agatston method, so that's the common method for determining the score, which was calculated for each of the calcified lesions, and the scores were summed across all lesions within a given artery and across all the arteries. So that's basically all the typical protocol they do when they're reading those scans to look for calcified plaque to get your calcium score. So nothing out of the ordinary. Measurement of other covariates. They looked at the demographic, lifestyle, and education characteristics, things like age, race, sex, smoking status, alcohol consumption, physical activity, education. All of that was assessed during the interview. Educational attainment was categorized as greater than 12 years, meaning up to high school degree. 13 to 16 years, meaning college degree or similar level of education, or more than 17 years, which is a postgraduate degree, MD, JD, PhD, those kinds of things. Smoking status was classified as either current, former, or never. Participants rested in the sitting position for 5 minutes before they did the blood pressure. They were measured 3 times at 1-minute intervals with a random 0 on the right arm. The second and third measurements were averaged and recorded. Lab tests were also performed. Briefly, they did an overnight fasting blood draw using the EDTA vacuometers. All right, let's keep going here. Oh, they also did total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, triglycerides, creatinine, fasting plasma glucose, that's blood glucose. Diabetes was defined as having a fasting glucose of more than 126. Hypertension defined as taking antihypertensive medications, having a diagnosis of hypertension, or having 3 consecutive systolic blood pressure readings of 140/90 or greater. Body mass index was calculated as weight divided by the square of your height. So all of those were the ways that they measured their health at the very beginning of the study. All right, the statistical analysis. Normally distributed continuous data were expressed as a mean SD, and the non-normally distributed continuous data otherwise were expressed by the median. Categorical data was expressed as numbers. CAC was evaluated at baseline year 15. All continuous characteristics reflect the average of 0, 7, 15. And then the dietary data, the averages of years 0 and 7. That's just a whole lot of gobbledygook to say they tried to streamline the information down so that it could be usable for this study. All right, let's see if we can get to the good part, or the not so good part, so I can rant a little bit about that. Okay, so they took a look at low-carb diets, and they said it may decrease subsequent energy intake. In other words, they did admit in the study it does cause a spontaneous reduction in calories, because you're not as hungry. We did not control for total energy intake in the various models. We did not perform adjustment for intake of other macronutrient components, as low-carb diets in turn may increase protein and fat. No, it doesn't may increase protein and fat. When you cut carbohydrates, you increase your consumption of protein and fat. That's just natural because that's what's left. We performed adjustment for dietary intake of micronutrients, which have been reported to be associated with the risk of coronary artery calcium progression in multivariate nutrient density models. We further used a restricted cubic spline regression model with 3 knots to assess the non-nuclear dose response association with carb intake and this progression of CAC. We did a time varying sensitivity analysis for participants who are identified with the progression, blah, 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 blah. So that's all the gobbledygook of how they got to the conclusions that they came to. So let's get to those conclusions. The characteristics of all the included participants were summarized in Table 2, and Table 2 was back here. Anyway, I'm going to explain it. You don't have to see it. Here it is. The average age at the first CT scan was 40.3 years old. That was in year 15. Remember, they started when they were young. And so by year 15, they were 25 when it started. Year 15, they were all 40 by average. 1,011 of them were men. That was 45% of the population. 454 were smokers. That was 20%. 329 of them were hypertensive, high blood pressure. That was 15%. In addition, 204 of them exhibited CAC at baseline. So at baseline, when they were already young, 9.2% of the study participants already had coronary calcium going on. Now that's interesting, because usually when you're under the age of 50, 0 is pretty much a foregone conclusion. Most people have 0 at that young of an age. So that's interesting. Here, according to results of the X-tile analysis, individuals were categorized into 3 groups by the percentage of total energy from carbohydrate intake. This is what they consider low. 43%. That was their low carb category. Moderate was 43 to 53, and high carb was greater than 53% of calories. None of those 3 are low carb. The lowest was 43%. Now, if they came and they said, I would even say, if they came and they said, okay, the low carb category is less than 25%, it would still be too damn high, but at least it would be more reasonable. Their low carb is 43%. You cannot call that a low carb diet. It's just not. By no definition is 43% of your calories coming from carbohydrate low carb. As we already demonstrated, if it's a 2,000 calorie diet, 43% of that, you're still looking at well over 200 grams of carbs. That's not low carb. Under 100 grams, I would say, is low carb. And in order for them to get there, they'd have to go substantially lower in the percentage of calories coming from carbohydrate. How do they do that? And yet in the title, they got low carbohydrate diet and coronary artery calcium progression. It's dishonest is what it is. Participants with lower energy from carbohydrate intake were more likely to be men, smokers, to have a lower education level, to drink more, and to have higher levels of body mass index, systolic blood pressure, fasting glucose levels, total cholesterol, LDL, triglycerides. All right, so there's your key that this is a bogus study. They say the people who ate the lowest amount of carbohydrate, listen to this, men who smoke. Do you think smoking has any impact on that coronary calcium score? Yeah, I bet it does. Lower education, which means you probably don't make very good choices about the quality of carbohydrates in that 43%. Oh, I'll just have M&Ms in this 43%. No. So high blood pressure, high blood glucose, high triglycerides. Guys, if they were actually carbohydrate restricting, the blood pressure would be down. The blood sugar would be down. The triglycerides would be down. They're fooling themselves if they're pretending like people eating low carb have bad markers in those areas. You just don't. With regard to dietary patterns, participants with lower energy from carbohydrate intake tended to have higher energy intake of protein and fat. Well, duh. What else is there to eat? If you're not eating carbohydrate, you're eating fat and protein. Why is that hard to understand? You're also having higher dietary magnesium, calcium, and vitamin D. Hey, that's okay. All of those things are healthy for you. Along with lower dietary fiber. You could get fiber if you want it, but it's not a be-all, end-all. However, there were no significant differences regarding race, hypertension, and diabetes prevalence, physical activity, and HDL amongst the three groups. That's another problem. If the HDL of the low-carb group, lowering carbs and increasing their fat intake, if the HDL was the same as both other groups, that tells you they weren't eating enough fat and they weren't restricting carbohydrate enough. Because when you lower carbs and increase fat, one of the telltale signs that you're doing it well is your HDL goes up. And it didn't happen. All right, so now they're getting into the association between dietary carbohydrate and this CAC progression. So during a follow-up period of 8.3 years, 591 cases had progression of coronary artery calcium. That was 26.5%. The percentage of CAC progression decreased as the carbohydrates in the diets increased, low versus moderate versus high carb, as results yielded from both unadjusted and adjusted models. The most significant progression was found in those who had the lowest carb intake. And I'm going to remind you again, yes, lowest in this study. Not low carb, lowest of the three categories. Now, why did the other two categories not see coronary calcium deposits like the ones that, I don't know. See, there's so many confounding variables here from the smoking and the drinking and all the everything. I don't know what other factors are playing a role in those other ones not having near the progression. In the final model, the hazard ratios of CAC progression comparing the moderate and the highest carb diet intake with the lowest carb were 0.84. Shows the restricted cubic splines of the risk of CAC progression along levels of carbohydrates as percentage of total energy. Consistent with the above analysis, spline regression analysis confirmed carbohydrate intake was inversely and non-linearly associated with the risk of CAC progression compared with the reference model. Similar results were found in the time-varying sensitivity analysis, blah, 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 blah. Are you getting the picture here? They didn't even need to do this study. If this was the sloppiness by which they were going to do it, why even bother? Other than somebody had to have paid sources of funding Was supported by a grant from the National Science Foundation of China, funded by various contracts with the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute from the NIH in the United States. That's who funded this study. Now, do they want to undermine the popularity of low-carb, keto, real food types of diets with a study like this? Because it makes you wonder what would be the purpose of doing a study like this. It's such awful, sloppy, bad science, I'm surprised it got past peer review. When participants were stratified by age, over 40 or under 40, sex, race, body mass index, hypertension, and baseline CAC, the association between carbohydrate intake and CAC progression was the same. However, a differential association was observed if the subgroups were divided by race, showing a stronger inverse association between carbohydrate intake and CAC in whites than blacks. So in other words, if you're Caucasian, this coronary artery calcium progression is far worse in you if you eat this so-called low carb 43% than if you are of a minority group. So then they teased out the animal versus plant-based low carb, and they showed that the animal-based was significantly more associated with severe CAC than a plant-based. Blah, 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 blah. All right, so let's get into the discussion. In this large prospective cohort study, we found that lower carbohydrate intake as a percentage of total energy during young adulthood was associated with an increased risk of coronary artery calcium progression later in life. Moreover, replacement of carbohydrates with predominantly animal but not plant-based sources of protein and fat exerts potent effects on this progression. To our knowledge, this is the first study demonstrating that long-term low-carb diets beginning at a young age were associated with a higher risk of subsequent CAC progression. No, it was not. I'm called Living Low-Carb Man all over the internet for a reason. 43% of your carbs, over 200 grams of carbs, ain't a low-carb diet. You can shine up a turd, but it's still a turd at the end of the day. Don't try to pee on me and tell me it's raining. And that's what they're doing in this study, pretending like 43% carbohydrate in the diet is a low-carb diet. Again, I would give them the caveat. If they said it was less than 25%, that's still too damn high to be low-carb. But at least it would have been closer and more intellectually honest. And then what results would they have seen? Did nobody in this study go super low? This started in the 80s. Atkins was a thing then. Were people not actually doing that? It's crazy. This is distinct from the results of a previous study called the MESA study, multi-ethnic study of atherosclerosis. Several plausible explanations could at least in part account for the discordance. The participants included in our study are much younger than those in the MESA study. As coronary artery calcium is an age-related pathological process characterized by mineral deposition within the coronary arteries, CAC severity increases as you get older, and that's true. I would give the caveat. Increases as you get older if you change nothing in your diet and lifestyle. If you keep up a bad diet and lifestyle, then yes, you're going to see that progression as you get older. If you make changes to your diet and lifestyle, you can mitigate that progression. The potential role of low-carb diets on coronary artery calcium progression may be overwhelmed among the relatively older adults enrolled in the MESA study. Indeed, our findings confirmed an attenuated tendency between low-carb diets and coronary calcium progression in older participants. On the other hand, the different carbohydrate intake as a percentage of total energy across the study population was also a possible confounding variable. Since participants in the MESA data generally consumed moderate to high levels of carbs, the percentage of participants consuming low-carb diets, defined as under 45% of total energy intake from carbs in our sample, was 2.3-fold greater. I still cannot get over they keep calling this low carb. I hope I've hammered home the point. 45%, 43, what they've switched numbers a couple times here. Whatever they want to describe it, over 40% of their energy intake from carbs is not low carb. Just not. Additionally, the interaction was observed when the analysis was stratified by race, indicating a stronger association between this with whites than blacks, as we said. It was reported compared with blacks, whites consumed less carbs. They exhibited higher CAC levels at much younger ages. This implies that there might be a possible link between low-carb diets and a higher risk of cardiovascular disease amongst the whites in the cohort. Again, how do you know? Did they take into account family history of heart disease? Did they take into account all these other factors that could play a role? No, it doesn't look like it. An interesting result of our study was that only animal protein or fat chosen to replace carbohydrates in the low-carb diet promoted this coronary artery calcium deposits, which was supported by the notion that animal sources of protein and fat in a low-carb diet may have an impact on cardiovascular-related mortality. That's simply not true. When you lower carbohydrate intake enough and then replace that carbohydrate intake with animal-based foods, this doesn't happen. The reason this happened was they kept the carbs way too high. They basically were eating a high animal-based fat and protein with high carbohydrate. That is a recipe for heart disease. If they wanted to be fair, they would have pushed the total carbohydrate intake under 10% of the total calories for the day. And they were more than 4 times that, 4.5 times that. That's not a fair assessment of a low-carb diet. A large prospective cohort study documented that low-carb diets with high intake of animal food and fat were significantly associated with higher long-term CVD mortality. Nope, simply not true. You can say it all day long. You can sit there and lie to people in a study. It doesn't make it true. I can tell you the sky is green, but it's still blue. Doesn't change the fact it's still blue. Doesn't change the fact that if you eat animal-based foods in the absence of carbohydrate, there is not harm to your cardiovascular health. Let's stop scaremongering, people. It's why I had to write this book, to calm people's nerves, and they still are worried because doctors freak out about cholesterol. CAC is not going to progress as a result of eating low carb. It was speculated that increased inflammatory cytokines, oxidative stress, and reduced endothelial progenitor cells under the low-carb diet, together with a high-fat diet or high animal protein, are possible mechanisms for enhancing CAC. It just doesn't happen. Thus, it is crucial to incorporate quality and types of macronutrients when investigating the association of low-carb diets with CAC progression. No, it's crucial to incorporate low enough carbohydrates to get the benefit that you're looking for or to get the result of what you're trying to test. Stop being intellectually dishonest with people. How does a scientist who has a PhD, an MD, how do they get away with such unethical research practices? Why does it take a layperson who has no background in science to break down this convolution of science? It's horrible, you guys. And yet they do it all the time. Some limitations of this study, there are a bunch of them, but let's see what they think the limitations are. First, dietary intake is not perfectly measured because they used food frequency questionnaires. You think? Food questionnaires are notoriously invalid and incomplete in these kinds of studies, and yet they're used over and over and over again, especially now that we have technology with smart devices that you can just type in what you ate every day and have it go right to an app that then the researchers can access. Why do we still live in the dark ages of, okay, tell me how many hamburgers you've eaten in the last year? No. Second, the analysis of the current study was based on dietary information with cumulative average daily consumption from 0 to 7. We've conducted the time-varying sensitivity analysis spanning over 10 years, showed consistent conclusions. However, the potential influences of dietary pattern changes during the follow-up could not be completely excluded. Here's the thing. People change their diet often. Sometimes they'll get on a kick to go low-fat. Sometimes they'll get on a kick to binge and have crappy garbage. Maybe they'll try a low-carb diet, a real low-carb diet, not one like this study. So it's like you can't really extrapolate what people are doing based on one small sample and then trying to replicate it and say, this is how they eat. That's horrible science as well. Third, despite our careful adjustment for the known and suspected confounders, residual confounding cannot be completely ruled out because of the observational nature of prospective cohort studies. This is so key, guys, that they're admitting this in their study. They're saying that you really can't rule out all these confounding variables. They matter. They make a difference in the final outcome. And so whatever conclusion we come to, you really can't hang your hat on it. All a study like this does is sets up a really good hypothesis to be tested in a randomized controlled trial. Now, the problem with CAC progression and looking at a dietary thing is you can't lock people up in a metabolic ward for 15 to 30 years. Little bit unethical. I'm trying to think if somebody offered to lock me up in a metabolic ward for 15 years, what that would be worth to me. Meaning I could not get in the outside world for 15 years. $15 million, $1 million a year? And then get out and have the money and, I don't know, be worth it. But that'd be a hell of a expensive if you had even 100 people involved in that. That'd be a lot of money. And that's just for paying the people participating. Could you imagine? Taken together, we found that low-carb diets beginning at early adulthood were associated with an increased risk of subsequent CAC progression as they entered middle age, particularly when animal protein or fat were increased. As a popular strategy for weight management, long-term animal-based low-carb diets should be advocated with great caution to avoid the potential impact on coronary atherosclerosis. This was actually published in the October 16th, 2020 issue of the journal Arteriosclerosis, Thrombosis, and Vascular Biology. And it's complete and utter garbage science. It's garbage science, guys. I still cannot believe this passes for science in 2020. All right, I'm dying to see what you guys have to say. We're going to go here first over to Instagram. Then if you joined us late, we now have Periscope. So welcome to my Periscope fans. We're going to get to your comments next, then Facebook, then YouTube. Thank you all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. We go live 11 a.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, right here, Jimmy Rants on Instagram. Lavender Love, you're supposed to suck in air besides carbs. Wow. Yikes. How do they dare call this a study, says Kat. Kat, you tell me, how do they get away with doing studies like this and it being legitimized? Like, to me, that's criminal, to legitimize this kind of research, thinking it matters, thinking it means something. I don't know. It's a shame this kind of research study gets out there, but it does. And it's why I do this show here, so that when there's bad science, you guys can tell the difference. Like, I hope it's quite obvious why this is extremely bad science. I don't think I need to reiterate the fact why this is such bad science on so many levels. It's not even funny. Cariana says, is the calcium scan itself still controversial amongst cardiologists? Oh, you bet it is. They think it's bunk because, and those of you that haven't followed CT heart scans and the controversy around it, a lot of cardiologists say, yeah, it's okay to do the CT scan to see the calcified plaque, the hard plaque, but it doesn't show you the soft plaque, and the soft plaque can be a problem as well. And yes, while it's true you do have soft plaque in there, which is the pre-calcified plaque, when it's soft like that. Once it's calcified, that's showing you the advanced progression of this. So if you have a big fat 0 on your CAC, you don't have to worry about soft plaque because it really hasn't done anything to calcify yet. And again, it has nothing to do with the amount of fat that you eat, the amount of cholesterol you eat. That's what they're claiming in this study. Well, when you cut your carbs, you're eating a lot more animal cholesterol and animal saturated fat. That's what the implication is there. But when you truly lower your carbohydrates to a therapeutic level, I would say definitely below 20%, but probably most therapeutically below 10% of your total calories, that's when you're going to get the benefits. But yeah, it's still controversial because cardiologists, they love making money from doing heart disease. Although, what was it, earlier this year, it might have been last year, there was a brand new thing put in the cholesterol guidelines that if you get high cholesterol, listen to this, you guys. If you ever go to your doctor and they say you've got high cholesterol, you need to be on a statin. Before they're supposed to push the statin on you, they're supposed to have you go get a CT heart scan. This is in the new cholesterol guidelines that came out. Like I said, it was either earlier this year or sometime last year, all the months pushed together this year. But it's a new standard, guys. So make sure anybody in your life that a doctor's trying to push a statin medication on them, you explain to them, look, you're supposed to get a CAC score, a CT heart scan. So tell them to ask for the CT heart scan. The doctor can prescribe it. They give you a prescription. You go down to the center. You go into the CAT scan. They do the little 3-minute test. It's about $100. And then you can have that run and get your score back. And if it comes back a big fat 0, it doesn't matter what your cholesterol is. Doesn't matter really anything else. The only other number that might matter is if your inflammation levels, things like HSCRP, homocysteine, IGF-1, all of those, they measure them and they come back elevated for signs of inflammation, then it just means you need to make some changes. But if you get a big fat 0 on your CT heart scan, you're good for the next 5 years. You don't have to run it again. It's not something you have to get every single year. If you get a 0, you don't have to test again for 5 years. 5 to 7 years is basically what they say. But yes, still controversial within cardiovascular circles. Angie says, my late dad's endocrinologist told me that 160 to 200 grams of carbs a day was what they considered low carb. Yeah, because they're stupid. Clinically speaking, maybe that's low carb compared to the 300 to 400 grams a day that the Standard American diet has. But if you're trying to get a therapeutic effect, go low. And the reason they go to that 160 to 200, by the way, Angie, is they are under the assumption that your brain requires 130 to 140 grams of carbs to operate. And that if you go below that, your brain won't work well. And the reason they do that is they determine that when you're a glucose burner, you need 130 to 140 grams of glucose to fuel your brain. What they don't think about, though, is when you don't fuel your body with glucose and you fuel it with ketones, guess what your brain gets fueled with? Ketones, which is the preferred fuel source for the brain anyway. So that's why they go that high. They're scared to death to go below 100 grams of carbs. Low Carb New Yorker, my friend's dad is on the brink of death, type 2 diabetes, just coded, and then they discovered triple blockages going into organ failure. My numbers look great. I have a coronary calcium score of 8. That's incredible. Anything really under 50 is pretty good with a CAC. 0 is ideal, but 8 is not horrible. I'm sorry to hear about your friend's dad. Type 2 diabetes, and it doesn't surprise me that it comes along with blockages. Type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart disease, all of those things, guys, are the exact same disease. It's the disease of insulin resistance. And so not surprising that, unfortunately, all of those things are leading to your friend's dad's soon death. Sorry to hear that. My doc wants me on statins because of high cholesterol. Yeah. Angie says statins actually cause diabetes and cancer, so don't take it. Oh, it does worse than that. In Cholesterol Clarity, I talked about the increase not just of diabetes and cancer, but actually of heart disease itself. It actually increases your risk of heart disease by as much as 12%. percent because it reduces, when you take a statin, it takes away CoQ10 out of the body, which is a key heart health element. So yeah, they're bad news. Chapter 5, if you ever pick up my book, Cholesterol Clarity, go right to chapter 5 if you want to learn about statin drugs, because I tell you the truth about it. And then if you want to know why doctors are so clueless about cholesterol, go read chapter 10, because I talk all about why they're clueless. You know, and I'm not anti-doctor, but doctors are trained in a certain way, and it has nothing to do with diet and lifestyle. Just got a DM today on Instagram from a lady who said, oh my gosh, my doctor keeps pushing the statins, and I don't understand why he's not talking about diet and health and da-da-da. And I'm like, he's not trained. He's not trained. It's not what he does. I think there will never be any meaningful change until policymakers step up and accept newer, unbiased research to redirect the medical field. Oh, and that's a ship hard to turn at this point. Kat says, these studies make our life so much harder. I have to advocate for healthy lifestyle. What a shame hearing constant comments of, oh, don't eat carbs, you eat meat. Did you know about that study? Yeah. Which, Kat, you know, that's why I address these studies on Jimmy Rants, is I don't really hear a lot of people countering it. And of course, in the mainstream of health media, you're certainly not going to hear that. There's just a few of us that look at the studies on a regular basis and try to make sense of them. All right, thank you, Instagram. Now we're going to pop over to Periscope. Welcome, Periscope. Thank you for joining today. And let's see if we got any comments over here. I'm trying to remember how you see the comments. It's been a little while since I've done Periscope, so my apologies, you guys, for... All right. Oh, there they are. Okay. I knew I had to tap the screen and then scroll. Okay. Fear tactics. They have to sell their garbage. Oh, yeah, they do. And they do that well. I'm waiting to get calcium removal surgery. Calcium removal surgery? What is that? 49%, nothing to see here. Wow. Yeah, 49% carbohydrates, and they think that's low carb. I have inflammation just hearing that number. Yeah. Yeah, I was trying not to have a coronary hearing this bad study. Low carb equals better control of your health. Yes, exactly. Fear seems to be in abundance these days. Yeah, fear, they have taught us this year, fear sells, and it sells hard. The more carbs you eat, the more likely you believe that crap. Yeah. Yeah, tell people they can have 45 to 49% carbohydrates in their diet. They're going to be like, yeah. If people successfully lower the carbohydrates, they will see and feel the benefits for themselves. That's true. That's true. Great to see you. Well, great to be here. And thank you, Periscope. Since I have a fourth device now, I usually go live on Instagram as the main page and Facebook and YouTube. But since I have the fourth device, I decided to go live on Periscope. Still got 10,000 followers over there. So I thought I'd give you guys a little ringy-dingy here today. So thank you for joining. Thank you. And let's go over now to my Facebook page. What's up, Facebook? Jason says, my doc says I have familial hypercholesterolemia. There's no way he knows that unless he ran one specific test, Jason. And next time you go in, ask him, did you run the Ambry genetics test for familial hypercholesterolemia? Ambry, A-M-B-R-Y, genetics. That's the name of the test. If he did not, that test was $1,200. If he did not run that test, you need to say, well, how do you know I have FH? Because that's the only way to test for FH, is to run that test. Been various strictness of carnivore for the past 2.5 years. Triglycerides better when carnivore is very strict. Coronary calcium score is 0. 2 tests in 5 years. Carnivore-ish numbers are total cholesterol 315. Trigs 257. Your trigs are a little bit high. HDL 45, LDL 218. Strict carnivore numbers. Total cholesterol 283, trigs 91. There's trigs going down. HDL 44, LDL 221. The only thing on that profile that I see that might need a little help is the HDL of 44. but your triglycerides dropped significantly. You can actually bump up that HDL by eating a little more saturated fat in your diet. But overall, those are great numbers. Tanya says, these types of studies push my buttons. I'm so grateful that you find them, unpack them for us here so we can be aware and be armed with good knowledge. It's such a huge blessing. Yes, thank you. Jason says, Doc says that while my CAC is 0, he thinks I have lots of soft plaque. Yeah, see, that's the thing, Jason. There's no way to measure soft plaque, so how do they know? It's scare tactics, if you ask me. Tanya says, very interesting about requiring the CAC before issuing a statin. Yeah, they just put that in the updated cholesterol guidelines. I did a whole Jimmy Rants on the updated guidelines for cholesterol. Guys most people don't even know that doctors have cholesterol guidelines that they follow. And so in the guidelines now, before they can even push a statin drug on you, they're supposed to say, all right, you have high cholesterol, let's get a CT heart scan to see what your heart calcium score is. And if they don't do that, then they're not following the guidelines. So call them out. I'm going to use that as another case point with my folks. Yes, please do. Please do. All right, thank you, Facebook. Now let me pop over here now to my YouTube channel. What's up, YouTube? Craig says 49% equals low carb. Did you know 4 out of every 3 people don't understand fractions? That's true, because if 49% of the total calories are coming from carbohydrate, unless you're only having protein or only having fat, carbs are going to be the highest category. So you're right, it's high carb. Let's just 50-50 it down the middle with protein and fat, 25-25. Like people didn't get it, but I love it. 4 out of every 3 people don't understand fractions. That's good. You guys are funny. Bunny Fufu says, it sounds like, as usual, they are expecting people to check their thinking at the door and just accept the conclusions without question. Well, you know me well enough that I'm going to call that out on Jimmy Rants every day of the week. I love how they construct a straw man argument and attack that instead of a true low-carb diet. Yeah, they know if they actually look at a low-carb diet that's genuinely under 10% of calories, they would have had far different results from this. Craig says, can you explain how ketones are the body's preferred energy source? I'm confused, as we know the body will flush out alcohol first, then carbs, then proteins, then fat. Or am I answering my own question? Yeah, you pretty much did answer your own question. A little bit off topic of what we're talking about. We do have Ask Me Anything tomorrow if you want to ask that again. But in short, the body utilizes, especially the brain and the heart and different organs in the body utilizes ketone bodies more efficiently than it does glucose. Doesn't mean you still don't have glucose dependent functions in the body. You do, but you can get that from fat and protein that you consume. And so, yes, you're right. It flushes out alcohol and toxins and then carbs, and then it goes to protein and then the fat. That is the order by which it burns. And so when you shift over to fat and protein primarily as your energy source, you get rid of the glucose predominantly in your body and you shift it over to the ketones, and that gives you the fuel. It's why you're satiated. It's why your brain is happy and why you think clearer when you're either fasting or you're on a ketogenic diet. It becomes pretty quickly evident that the body loves to burn ketones for fuel. But thank you for that. I still feel like I'm wasting my breath talking to these kinds of people. Yeah, maybe, but that's just the kind of things that we have to do in order to, I guess, try to educate. Because it does make our lives so much harder, Kat says, have to advocate for healthy lifestyle. Yeah. It's a shame, but it is where we are. That's the unfortunate thing. But it just means we remain vigilant and we just keep doing the things that we know to do and keep trying to drop little hints here and there. Been doing this since 1999. My calcium score is 0. Go, Jen. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm due to get another one pretty soon. It's been probably 5 or 6 years since I've had one. And I would like to get another one because I'm getting at the age where if I'm going to get coronary artery calcium progression, it's going to be now. I'm about to turn 49 in a few days, and so I need to keep an eye on that as I get older, and I will, and keep doing all the things. So, all right, well, I hope now you feel a little more informed about this study, and can share if anybody says, hey, that study says low carb progresses your heart calcium and it's horrible, and now you know the truth about the study. And that's it for this episode of Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. And as always, you can engage live in the content. You got to go follow me right here on Instagram. I'm Jimmy Rants on Instagram. Go check me out. We go live Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So thank you so much for being here today. We also simulcast on Periscope, brand new, Facebook and YouTube. Thank you all for being here today. You can watch the replay over on IGTV on the Jimmy Rants Instagram page. We also have the past episodes up over on YouTube. Type in a keyword Jimmy Rants, you will find the show. Finally, you can find all of the past episodes up over at the official website. It is JimmyRants.com. And while you're there, just noodle around and see all the episodes. 600 and almost 625 now we're coming up on with episodes. So lots of backlists if you have missed anything. So guys, that's it for this episode. Tomorrow is Friday, and on Fridays, it's Ask Me Anything. So come back tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We will let you ask your questions live on the air. I will be putting up on my stories on Instagram a little box for you to type in your questions ahead of time. I usually get some pretty interesting doozy of questions ahead of time. So if you want to try to stump Jimmy, ask me something about low-carb diets, keto, fasting, cholesterol, podcasting, book writing, entrepreneurialism, being an awesome guy. I can answer all those questions. I'm just kidding. Can answer all those questions for you guys, and we will do that tomorrow at 11 a.m. We'll see you then. All right.